This is Happiness. I'm Sean Hong. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm joined by political economist and social technologist E. Glenn Weil. He's the founder and research lead of Microsoft Research Special Projects Plural Technology Collaboratory, where he focuses on using ideas of political economy to develop social technology. He's also the founder of Radical Exchange Foundation and founder and chair of the Polarity Institute. Glenn earned his PhD from Princeton, spent 3 years at the Harvard Society of Fellows, served as an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, and taught at Yale. In 2018, he co-authored Radical Markets, Uprooting Capitalism and Democracy for a Just Society with Eric Posner, introducing an innovative voting mechanism known as quadratic voting. Wired profiled him as one of the 25 leaders shaping the next 25 years of technology, and Bloomberg Businessweek as one of the 50 most influential people of 2018. His latest venture, the ambitious open-source book, Plurality, The Future of Collaborative Technology and Democracy, is a collective manifesto for how technology might actually serve democracy rather than undermine it. Leading the project alongside Glenn is Taiwan's first digital minister, Audrey Tang, together with members of the global plurality community from all walks of life. To spread awareness of plurality, Glenn and Audrey have been traveling the world this year, meeting with visionaries and community members inspired by this movement. During Glenn's visit to Taiwan this summer, amid a year punctured by record-breaking global elections, we sat down to reflect on the possibilities that emerge when technology, democracy, and human cooperation intersect. I believe many would agree that we're living in a peculiar moment, a moment where algorithms curate our worldviews and push us deeper into ideological bubbles, where content triumphs over context and spectacle over literacy on social media, turning us into ferocious versions of ourselves. Our technological advancements have thrust these conditions into our daily lives, exacerbating mass emotional reactivity and divide. We're discovering, perhaps a little too late, that our greatest challenge may not be choosing between freedom and control, between human and machine, but learning to embrace a more complex truth, that life's contradictions aren't bugs in our human condition, they are features of our shared existence. As the great American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. See, the 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin saw something that many of today's technologists often miss, that when it comes to human values and experiences, there isn't always a single correct answer to optimize for. The complexity of human experience makes our value what Berlin calls incommensurable. They overlap, they're situational, and they can be inconsistent. In other words, they can't fit neatly into a single overarching system, a cohesive worldview that pieced together like some sort of cosmic jigsaw puzzle. At the same time, this incommensurability of values doesn't just exist at a political or social level where we have to deal with lots of different people. This is the way our values work at an individual level as well, where we all have a hierarchy of values we favor. When Berlin wrote about pluralism, he wasn't suggesting a wishy-washy anything-goes approach, but rather a profound recognition that human society is more like an ecosystem than a math equation. It needs diversity to survive and flourish. Glenn's journey embodies this understanding. From his early academic work to his current role at Microsoft, from founding Radical Exchange to co-creating the plurality movement with Audrey, his path has been one of building bridges between seemingly contradictory worlds. This vision is already showing real impact. In Tokyo's recent gubernatorial race, we saw plurality in action when Ano Takahiro, a political outsider, used collaborative technology to engage citizens directly, earning unprecedented support by giving voters a genuine voice in shaping policy. But let's face it, no one of us individually has all the solutions to these mammoth questions about our relationship with technologies. As we build tech that will shape how billions of people connect, communicate, and make decisions, in a time where AI systems become more powerful, where our climate crisis deepens and our social fabric strains, pluralism feels more urgent than ever. While we must never sugarcoat that most of today's innovation is largely driven by what's good for capital, not people, I'm also wary of over-demonizing technology. At its core, technology has opened new fields of expression and expanded what's possible. As one after another edifice of human suffering crumbles before the collective might of science and technology, we know we are accelerating and transitioning into something different. However, what holds me back, what should also hold all of us back, is how the technologists in power talk about technology as our savior and as if there's only one path forward, their path. In light of all that, our conversation begins with Glenn's third visit to Taiwan and his experience at the Plurality Summit in Taipei. There, leaders like Audrey Tang and Vitalik Buterin gathered to explore the future of collaborative technology, a discussion that naturally flows into Taiwan's unique role as a meeting place for global democratic innovation and how different communities are embracing these ideas. From there, we dive into the philosophical underpinnings of pluralistic thinking, drawing inspiration from John Dewey's vision of democracy and moving beyond simple binaries toward a more nuanced understanding of human agency. We also explore how plurality intersects with modern scientific thinking and Glenn's theory of leadership, one that emphasizes holding contradictions within oneself as a way to build bridges between different worlds. In the latter half, our discussion takes a more personal turn as Glenn reflects on his relationship with Audrey Tang, whom he describes as a guru-like figure whose presence transforms those around her. We discussed the new documentary about Audrey's impact, the future of the plurality movement, and Glenn's excitement for expanding these ideas and connecting with people in more regions. Throughout our conversation, embodying the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity in infinite combinations, we weave connections between language, understanding, and reconciliation, all elements that shape our collective future. In preparing for this conversation, I found myself returning to a quote Glenn often references. Quote, "All truth, beauty, and progress comes from the union of the unlike." Unquote. This conversation is an attempt to understand how we need to shift from a culture that counts things to one that maps relationships. The biggest lesson I've learned from listening to Glenn and participating in this movement is one of humility. Not the false humility of denying what's true, but the humility that comes from realizing that I can't read your mind and everything that you believe is true, and I can't deny you believe that. Instead, I need to be courageous enough to show up with my humility and acknowledging that you believe it, because I can't change your mind for you. I can only create the conditions for change. In other words, all that one man can do for another is to show him the alternatives truthfully and lovingly, yet without sentimentality or illusion. These confrontation with the true alternatives may thus awaken all the hidden energies in the other, breathing new life into him. No single conversation can solve our challenges, but sometimes by looking at all problems in new ways, we can start to forge more appropriate paradigms forward, together. It matters because all of it blossoms from coordinating and figuring out the new sets of principles in a time of transition, beholding our shared values of being human in the digital age, and safeguarding what makes us human. What's most sacred is our ability to be besieged by contradictions, to accept ourselves as numerous, and to expand our curiosity and tolerance by relentlessly updating our previous ideas and beliefs. This is Glenn Wow. Hello, Glenn. It brings me so much joy that we get to share this time together.
Thanks so much, Sean.
You've now visited Taiwan for several times, right?
This is my third time.
Ah, the third time. Nice. How was this time different from the other times you visit here?
Well, it comes at the end of this trip that we've been doing around the world. And so it's really Taiwan as a gathering place, as a meeting place, as the name of Taiwan means in the traditional Taovan language. And it's a meeting place for all of the threads we've drawn together in the world. So here it was about Taiwan. It was very much about Taiwan, but it was about bringing people from around the world to see Taiwan, about them interacting with it, seeing what they take away from it, rather than what I take away with it, or, primarily contributing to the Taiwanese domestic scene. So that was an interesting difference.
Just a few days ago here in Nangang, Taipei, we were both speakers at the Plurality Summit in spreading the message of the book. Yourself, Audrey Tang, Vitaly Buterin, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, each bringing unique perspectives to this exploration of open collaboration. And what moments or exchange from those days have lingered with you?
Well, I think one of the things that was most fun after the event was that just today we went to Team Lab's Future Park, and the theme of that park is co-creation. And the narrative that they had about why they're doing it was very similar to the plurality narrative. So it's wonderful to see ideas that we develop echoed in more pop cultural, pop art manifestations that are present here, present in Japan. Anyway, it's when you get that kind of resonance rather than just preaching that I think it's always most meaningful.
Based on your conversation with the local communities and international guests here, I'm curious, how are people responding to and learning from these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we brought people from Japan, from the United States, from Latin America, and it was amazing how much they resonated with each other, how much they resonated with what's going on here in Taiwan, how much they started to feel part of a global movement. And, I wish we could have brought even more people, and I think we will in the future because I think everyone had such a wonderful time. But it was just remarkable to me how much of an impression being here in Taiwan and experiencing the atmosphere had on so many of these people. So,
just to give a bit more context to those who are new to the Plurality book, so earlier this year, the Times Magazine published an article titled "Taiwan's Digital Minister Has an Ambitious Plan to Align Tech with Democracy," and it emphasized on Audrey's mission to share idea that has blossomed in Taiwan and see how these notions of co-creation between tech and governance can be applied to other democratic societies. And one example is thinking about how ideas like pluralism can culturally be adapted to best fit different conditions of each societies. And my observation so far is that this movement is building momentum as we speak, and people around the world are resonating with this message. And just like me, many are asking themselves how they can be part of this ambitious mission. And as the co-author of this open source book, what are some common critiques or feedback that you've received from the readers? And more importantly, how might we motivate and welcome their perspectives to help iterate and strengthen this movement?
Well, the interesting thing is that abroad, we actually get very little criticism. My other previous book, Radical Markets, people liked it, but it was very provocative, very controversial. This book, if anything, there's been too little controversy, too little of the energy that goes into co-creation, a lot more just, positive energy, maybe in some cases low energy because it was copyright free. It didn't get nearly as broad distribution as my previous book did. But the place where I have faced pushback and criticism is here in Taiwan. Taiwan has a very self-critical, always pushing sort of a culture. And it is really quite remarkable that I would say probably 90% of the criticism and pushback and questioning we've gotten has been here. Sometimes even before we put any words down on the paper. So when we were writing the chapter about Taiwanese history, we tried to draw in historians to work with us. But everyone was already sure all the things we were going to do wrong in telling the story before they even, we had even said anything. So we kept saying to people, if you think we're going to do it wrong, why don't you do it instead? But anyway, so that was very interesting.
Well, as a Taiwanese, I guess some of those discussion and feedback would stem from how people here are open and passionate with talking about democracy and felt natural and free in exchanging ideas on how it could be better. And I believe it's healthy that people are participating. I think in many ways, these participations are powerful in bringing substantial change.
How did you feel about our treatment of the Taiwan's history? Did you read that part?
Yeah, I did. So I've read both the English and Mandarin versions of the book. As a Taiwanese reading the Taiwan chapter titled View from Yushan, what I will say is that though I've been taught about our own history growing up, now I appreciate it even more. And I feel very proud for those who were part of writing the chapter in showcasing our own culture and democratic history to the world. Not to speak for everyone, but I felt a sense of pride to just be involved, even a tiny part of that history. And I'm not saying that Taiwan has a perfect model, nor it should be replicated the exact same way for others. But I reckon that that feeling of pride comes with a lot of responsibility in making sure it's represented correctly for others to learn about us. And one main point that I think is refreshing is to see that Taiwan can connect and contribute to the world too in strengthening these democratic values. One example would be how we work together for vaccines and masks during COVID. I find it wonderful that we can be part of this global discussion where the focal point is not solely on geopolitical challenges, but on how collaborative technology gives us wings and allows us to demonstrate this resilience of ours, to draw a blueprint when people discuss about how to better realize a society where democracy and digital technology can thrive and be mutually intertwined. So yeah, I do think recognizing how far we've come and showcasing those inflection points in Taiwan's collective history to the world makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Glenn, is that during your speech at the summit a few days ago, you raised an interesting point on thinking beyond being an optimist or a pessimist as we navigate through this world. Could you elaborate on that idea and its significance?
Well, I think optimism and pessimism both take what's coming as given. They assume that we don't have any choices or agency. And I like to be neither an optimist nor a pessimist. I like to be someone who takes responsibility for what's happening and who feels the need to help people work together to push it in the direction that they collectively want to see it go in.
How do you see those mindsets being tied to the principle of pluralism? I know you've wrote an essay called Why I Am a Pluralist, and you elaborated in these principles in more details. How have your thoughts around it evolved?
Well, that essay, I think, was my first attempt in kind of a little bit more political, philosophical, or axiomatic terms to state what I was after. But it didn't put nearly as much emphasis on the technological articulation or the scientific foundations. And that, is of course what the book does in much greater detail. So that essay was trying to give a sense of what I meant at a philosophical level. So it was part of a series of political philosophy essays. But the book tries to really flesh out many more perspectives on what that means.
Were there any particular person or conversation that inspired you to better flesh out and evolve that thinking process?
There are definitely things I've read. I'm trying to think if there's someone I talked to. I've definitely been influenced by some of my conversations with the Reverend Johnny Moore, who is Donald Trump's spiritual advisor. And I've come to think a lot more about religion in relationship to these things, and reading the Taoist scriptures was also important to that aspect. I think the book Complexity by Mitchell Waldrop, W. Mitchell Waldrop, was quite important to me. I think those are probably the most important ones.
Interesting. Yeah, I believe there's much we can learn from adopting the pluralistic mindset of thinking and relating to other people, so we don't get that easily caught in the binary of things.
Well, one person that I met after writing the book that has been absolutely fascinating has been Ken Suzuki in Japan, who laid out his idea of a namaraka, or smooth society, more than a decade ago. And it anticipated many of the ideas of plurality, but it was never translated to English, so I had no awareness of it. It's still not translated to English.
This is my first time hearing about smooth society. Was it based on real-world examples in Japan, or?
Yeah, but it's more general. But it's very focused on this idea of not binary, not equal, but smoothly interconnected. Distinct but smoothly interconnected things.
And speaking of the interconnectedness of things, I understand that pluralistic thinking in many ways require a reservoir of knowledge between fields of studies and practices, and different disciplines reveal different truths at different scales, and pluralistic thinking, contrary to long-held convictions that there would be one day a great unifying theory that explains it all, how do you see plurality intertwined with the 21st century scientific movement's interdisciplinary nature?
So I think, first of all, there are many scientific advances in the 20th century that represent within the scientific domains pluralistic thinking. There's quantum mechanics, ecology, connectionist neuroscience. All of these use plural type of approaches in order to understand various scientific problems. But there's also, I think, a basic conceptual frame that you were alluding to, one unifying theory. I think some people have a model of science in their mind where you're sitting on the surface of the earth and you're digging down to the core of truth, throwing away falsehood and superstition as you go. But an alternative vision, the pluralistic vision, is that you're sitting on the surface of the sphere and you're planting trees. And the trees are growing outward into the infinite abyss. And as they grow out, they get more and more space. And the key problem, therefore, becomes how do you get them to cross-pollinate? Because otherwise they'll die. And so actually what you need to do is like build the connections, let the bees fly between so that they can cross-pollinate and continue to grow out and out into the infinite abyss, getting ever closer to the unknown, but with every step being further and further away from grasping it.
Yeah, wow. That's a beautiful analogy. I suppose being a bridge that connect disciplines and ideas means that one have to cultivate that conviction for curiosity in finding new understandings. And I wonder, Glenn, how did you cultivate that attitude? And for someone who may also want to become or build their own version of a bridge, where should they start?
I think that, my theory of leadership is that if you can hold within your soul conflicts that exist in society, if they are part of you and you're able to survive that and, not have a nervous breakdown and reconcile those things, then you become you offer to the world a thought of how those things can be resolved. So I grew up as a Democrat and became a socialist campaigner before becoming sort of an Ayn Rand person and founding the National Teenage Republican Organization in the United States. And then I became neither political thing. I became a technocratic economist. And then I rejected that and tried to become some kind of a bridge between those two things within the Web3 world, and then ended up at Microsoft at a key AI moment. And I am, I'm Jewish. I wear Star of David and a yarmulke on Shabbat, but I also have been very much like a pro-Palestinian activist. And I think, the more you can keep those things inside you and really identify with them, not be just in the center, but really feel what the different sides feel and yet somehow make them reconcile, then I think you have a gift to offer to others because you are an example of how they can be reconciled.
You grew up in Palo Alto,
Yeah.
a place where big ideas seem to float in the air. And I'm curious, and I'm curious about those early years at your family's dinner table. Were your parents the kind who encouraged you to question or to wrestle with different perspectives when you were a boy?
Well, I think in some ways, but also my family, in particular, my father was very much like a neo-atheist. He didn't like religion. He was very negative on religious people. And some of who I am actually comes from my reaction against that atmosphere growing up. Even though I am a pretty secular person and probably an agnostic, I have come to have deep respect for religious traditions and think that we don't incorporate them enough into life, and that that's a big problem for the work that we do as technologists. And part of that came from living as a neo-atheist, a child of a neo-atheist family, and then seeing kind of the limitations of that and the way that it held me away from being able to understand others.
So would you say there were always furious collision of ideas in your mind a lot of time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sometimes I do too. It takes a lot of mental energy to make sense of a multitude of things as you go deeper. But, the clarity and acceptance that emerged afterward can be invaluable.
You have to set with all of those different things and neither allow yourself to dismiss one for another, nor allow them to just get homogenized, but instead constantly struggle with their reconciliation.
After the break, we'll be back with Glenn Weil. From where you are right now, seeing in the greater context of things, in all of its complexity, how does it make you feel that many societies today are at the stage where ideologies are clashing and diminishing one another?
It makes me see opportunity. In the Tao Te Ching, it says that a good man is a bad man's teacher. A bad man is a good man's employment. So, if you're building engines, you don't see oil as a problem. You see it as an opportunity.
Yeah. And building on that, I think these opportunities multiply if we learn how to cooperate with one another. And to dive a bit deeper about the process of co-creation, I want to come back to the Plurality book. So it's a copyright-free book, which allows all the creators to give up their copyright and put the result into the public domain. And many, many contributors all over the world came together to co-create on this book. What do you think the future versions of this book would look like? And is there anything that you're particularly excited about in terms of the direction this community is developing towards?
Well, one area that I think will definitely develop, and maybe even by the end of the summer I'll put out a new edition, is to incorporate all the incredible ways in which people have harnessed these ideas to make impact around the world. It's been happening at an astonishing rate this summer, with the campaign for the governorship of Tokyo, using some of these ideas with the ways that they're being used by people in Venezuela to preserve their internet freedom. So there's all kinds of things going on in different parts of the world using these ideas. And I would definitely like to report on those in the context of a revision of this book.
That will be fantastic. I'm looking forward to reading them. I really want to ask you about the American philosopher and education reformer John Dewey, who was influenced by people like William James. I know Dewey has been one of your inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah, and his ideas has echoed through the book and your work. I remember reading that Dewey regarded democracy as a moral framework and as active social planning and collective action to guide social institutions to promote human flourishing. Can you share more about how he has impacted you in shaping your ideas and the ones related to plurality?
Well, the idea of Dewey's that is most heavily referenced in the book, but there are others that influence me a lot. The one that's most heavily referenced in the book is this notion of emergent publics. It's basically the idea that really contradicts the notion of democracy as a static, like there's these nation states and they vote in a particular way, and that's democracy. Because it challenges that to be a democracy, you need not only to have some kind of vote, what you need to do is incorporate everyone who's affected by decisions into those decisions. No one thinks that South Africa, before the end of apartheid, was democratic, because there were lots of people who were affected by the decisions of the state who did not have a voice, right? But Dewey points out that because technology constantly changes the way we're interdependent, it affects the patterns of people's interactions. When you develop boats, people on a river become interdependent. When you develop radio, people who receive the same message become interdependent. When you develop railroads, those who are connected by the railroads become interdependent. There constantly needs to be new polities created, new sites for democratic governance, because you can't just have the same static nation state govern and hope to be democratic. So democracy has to, in order to survive, be extremely dynamic, constantly adapting to those changing patterns of interaction.
Yeah, well, I believe Dewey, also express on the notion of being flexible in discerning the correlations instead of being static. So we work together to solve common problems many times, even without guarantee of success.
Yeah.
And I think it also translates beautifully into strategies for learning, to experiment and to be aware of the analogies and interconnecting patterns of phenomenon in between and within areas in order to better revise these theoretical ideas accordingly.
Another idea of Dewey's that influenced me very much is the notion that communication between people is always as fundamental as preference. Because you may, like, what does it mean for you to prefer one thing over another? Well, to even articulate that, you need language. And humans can never get anything without articulating it. They're one of the most incapable beings in the universe, absent communication, especially when they're young, right? And so there's a continual process by which only the things that you can articulate are things you can truly desire. And so your desires may shape what you say, but your ability to say things also shapes what you desire. And so there is no meaning to an independent individual utility function, a set of desires that you have just yourself, because you can't really have desires without expressing them. And so the individualistic notion that takes as the fundamental thing an individual preference can only be one small slice of how we think about things. The approach that takes systems of meaning-making communication as the fundamental thing and preferences as just reflections of those has to be at least as valid as the system that takes the individual preferences as the fundamental things. And the reality is that those two things are co-determined and intertwining.
I want to just to sit on that for a moment. Yeah, I like the aspect of language and knowing the limitation of how far it can take us in articulating our feelings and spreading the knowledge and influence. That's so thought-provoking and so important to how we unravel the modern achievements and predicaments we are all part of. Now, if you could explain the current state of the world to future generations when they look back, how would you articulate it?
I mean, central to it, I think, would be the emergence and importance of a new set of technologically oriented ideologies that underlies a lot of what is perceived as like the politics of left and right, but that actually those are sort of fading away and that these other ideologies are coming into existence. And we'll look back at this as the birth period of those things, the same way that, you know, communism and fascism were being born in the 10s and 20s, but were not really regarded as main things at the time. So I also think this decade will probably be regarded as the decade when there is a shift in the primary locus of, you know, civilization and technology and thinking about the future from the West to Asia. And that I think people will, you know, if you think about like the World War I, in retrospect, at the time people thought about it as a European war. But in retrospect, people recognize that as the moment when the United States became the dominant power and Europe faded into the background. You know what I mean? And I think in retrospect, people will probably, you know, everyone right now is focused very much on US politics. But I think in retrospect, maybe people will look at it, back on it as saying, well, it's actually free Asia, you know, Taiwan, Japan, India, and their challenges with the mainland as the main thing that was happening, and the US as more being like a proxy stage on which that played out, rather than, you know, same way that like World War I was more kind of the testing grounds for the American army, and really the European thing was kind of a sideline. You know what I mean?
Yeah, many believe that we are in this great transition phase where uncertainty is shaking things up. And in a way, I guess the uncertainty also reveals us that the center, or what seemed like the center now, may not hold or may shift, you know, places with what seems to be at the periphery. It's like when Adorno said the old world is dying and the new one is struggling to be born.
Yeah.
And to expand on these thoughts, to expand on these ideas, in this phase of transition, you know, new ways of mobilization and organization are also changing. A lot of it now is becoming more network oriented, and the flow of information has become some sort of currency that holds great power. Yet the core of the discourse are still trying to grapple how to combat these misinformation and disinformation and making sense in our entrenched beliefs, which are all exacerbated by technology. And in your opinion, Glenn, what are some ways we could improve these dialogues?
I mean, one frame I like is fact building rather than fact checking. So fact checking assumes there's an objective truth out there that you just need a certain technical skill to verify. Fact building is the notion that there are diverse perspectives out there, and it's that in finding the overlap between those perspectives that we build some notion of shared reality. And similarly, I think the notion of polarization is often very simplistically thought of in terms of like left, right in the United States or whatever. But there are so many different communities with so many different things that divide them at so many different scales and so many different intersecting planes that I think we really need to instead think about processes of building common understanding and the diversity of the different communities and the divides that exist within them. And that actually that's a source of strength because, you know, it's not the fact that there are holes in a quilt that make it weak. A quilt is full of holes. What makes a quilt weak is if all the holes line up in the same direction, if all the stitches are in the same direction, because then it can tear. but as long as the stitches cut across each other, it's strong.
I've never thought of it that way. That's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah, the strength of diversity. Speaking of which, I think storytelling is one powerful tool to knit that quilt closer. I'm bringing that up because I'm curious about the documentary Good Enough Ancestor, which is debuting in a few weeks as we speak, about Audrey's life and her impact. And in many ways, I think the documentary aligns with the goal with this podcast, trying to connect personal narratives to the broader context we all live in. And what drew you to be involved in telling her story at this particular time?
I believe that any book about ideas can reach, maybe a significant audience, but there's going to be a much larger set of people who are going to feel much more open or invited by a story, a personal story. And I believe Audrey's personal story is a very powerful one. I think it's got the arc of a Joseph Campbell hero with 1,000 faces, someone who had an unusual hardship, and as a result of that, through surviving it, came back with something unique to offer the world, and that, I think, is the essence of Audrey's story. And she went through a variety of unique things. There's the way in which her non-binariness is a metaphor for the broader plurality idea. There's the way in which her struggles with her heart is a metaphor for the ability to live on the edge of chaos, which is core to complexity theory. And it's also a metaphor for Taiwanese fragility and yet resilience, which in turn is a broader metaphor for the life force and so forth. So all these things make it, I think, a very compelling story that can tell through a personal narrative, through emotional connections, some of these broader principles.
And how do you feel knowing this chapter of your story intersects with Audrey's in the process of realizing these ambitious goals?
Being with Audrey is like doing meditation, or some might say taking psychedelics or something. It changes who I am. And just to feel that inside of me is very powerful for me. To feel myself like losing the ability to feel animus and hate, feeling myself becoming more humorous. All that is maybe one of the most important parts of being with Audrey.
Well, I'll assume you're not the only one feeling changed, transformed, being around her.
I hope not, because that's the whole reason I've devoted so much of my life to telling her story, is I believe that if world leaders get exposure to this, that it will touch their hearts and change their lives the same way it has for me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I believe special stories like this often find their way to people who need them most, and sometimes in ways we never expected. I wonder, was there a specific person or a community that kept appearing in your mind when making this documentary? Someone whose struggles or hopes make you think, oh, this story, this might just be the light they're looking for right now.
I mean, I had an experience where I showed the whole film to a cousin of mine who has participated in some of the campus occupations around Palestine, and who I think had lost faith that nonviolent change was possible, and really was inspired by Audrey's story to believe in that. To someone of her generation who's trans and so forth, to have someone like that showing the ideas of Gandhi and so forth, I think is very powerful. I think in the Middle East and in Israel-Palestine, her example can be very powerful. Those are, some places that I think emotionally for me, I would love to see her example shine.
Do you think Audrey knows the extent of what she meant for people who look up to her? How was it like for her?
I don't know. She's a very even keel person. I think she accepts that. She doesn't reject it. She's not falsely modest about it, but she also doesn't seem touched by it or anything like that. She just accepts it.
Well, she is one of the smartest person, and I believe it's good to have some healthy distance and using the energy and attention wisely.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually funny because there's some people who have asked me, given how devoted I am to Audrey, do I have some kind of romantic relationship with her? Or, and actually, it's very funny because it's quite opposite to that. Like, Audrey and I have a unique professional relationship, and she's changed my life, and, she's some kind of a guru or, a Gandhi to me. But at the same time, I don't even particularly like enjoy spending time with her personally. She's a very ethereal presence. She's not like someone I love to just hang out with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and I'm happy that we get to be part of each other's stories because of this larger mission. And seeing you and her spending months and months around the world spreading this message of the book, I'm sure more people will join us and find their way to contribute. And as we're getting closer to the end of the conversation, I want to bring up a quote that you return to often, one that stayed with me since I first heard you shared it. It's that all truth, beauty, and progress comes from the union of the unlike, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're turning 40 next year, I wonder, how do you see this idea of finding beauty in difference and in unexpected connection will guide your path forward, both in your relationship with yourself and in the bridges you build with others?
I mean, I feel very privileged in my life, especially recently, to be at the intersection of so many different cultures and attitudes and to have befriended so many people who are so different. And to, in almost every space I step into, constantly be connecting people who, to me, it seems very logical they work together, but who've never met each other. And every time I do that, I feel like a little spark or engine of something. And, that's very much become core to who I am.
Is there anything that you're looking forward to in the near future? Something that may spark joy or curiosity in your journey ahead?
Well, I've never been to Africa. I'm very excited to touch and speak to the most diverse place in the world, most diverse languages, most biologically diverse. That will be very interesting. I've never been to India, another incredibly diverse place that I think has so much to offer the world. I've never been to Southeast Asia, except for Thailand and Cambodia. But I haven't been to Indonesia and Malaysia. And so I'm very interested in that. I'm very excited for the moment that may come in US politics when the focus on the Trump phenomenon passes and the need for different perspectives that it emphasizes remains, but the overwhelming focus on one limited person passes. So, and I'm very excited for a new sort of free Asia that I believe is coming into existence. India and Bangladesh and Thailand and, Korea and Taiwan and Japan. I think there's so much energy there, and I'm really interested to see what comes of all that.
It's wonderful. Yeah, and before we close, I'd like to return to something at the heart of these conversations that I do. Those rare moments when we feel completely woven into the fabric of existence. I've come to believe that all life yearns toward wholeness, and we all seek moments of unity and oneness. And so, Glenn, would you share with us a moment when you felt an inseparable connection to the collective whole, that you were part of something larger than yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly felt a lot of those recently, and I think I felt a lot of that when I was, here in Taiwan and bringing all these people from around the world here to experience it. I just felt that I was part of a pattern in which it needed to happen, that people experience this place. and that I had just been a conduit for that. And, when I make these connections between people, I feel very much that. I feel there was this potential energy of this community talking to that community, and I was just kind of like the lightning bolt that crossed the chasm between the high and the low potential so that those could meet each other.
That's marvelous. And I'll leave it there. Glenn, thank you so much for sharing your time with me here in Taiwan.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much. Till next time. And that's the show. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Glenn for sharing his wisdom and time, to Audrey for inviting all of us in co-creating Plurality, and to my panelists, Giselle, Peter, and Hye-won for their brilliant contributions at the summit. To everyone in the Plurality community, thank you for breathing life into this movement. My thanks also goes to my friend Kay Lam for a gorgeous original portrait as the episode's cover art, and Sweet Xiao for communications. If you're intrigued by what you heard today, I encourage you to explore Glenn's work and Plurality further. Visit plurality.net to discover how you can be part of this ongoing conversation. For our Mandarin-speaking listeners, look for 多元宇宙协作技术与民主的未来, published by Infotris, available in Taiwan's bookstores and online platforms. To those who've reached out with messages and emails, your words mean so much to me. Thank you. If this conversation resonated with you, please consider following Happiness and leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're exploring, check out my conversations with neuropolitical scientist Dr. Leah Yu and director Pat Punitipat, who brought us Thailand's Academy Award entry, How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. Connect with us at HappinessPod on Twitter and Instagram, and if something in this episode moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Every share, every review helps keep these conversations going. I'm Sean Hong. Thank you for listening to Happiness. In these complex times, we need peace and love more than ever. Let's keep spreading both, one conversation at a time. See you soon. Godspeed.